Good evening. I'm Greer, President of Seahorse Victoria. My guests tonight are Lyndall and Rob Slaney. Welcome.
Thank you.
Rob, when did you first sort of know that you about this side of your life?
So I think it's always been there. I can imagine, or I can start to foster these feelings easily preteen. Would have been the idea that something was different. Back during the 1980s, roughly when this was, there was no community, there was no information. It was something that I didn't have any outreach. This is before the internet. There was no easy way of being able to get at any information. So it was just something that was fostering along and progressing. The progression of back then it would have been purely cross-dressing, would have been nothing more than just trying different articles of clothing, typically a lot more underwear because it was easier to hide if I wanted to wear it in public. It would have been underneath clothing, so obviously underwear is easier to hide than to come out in full.
I think that's what a lot of us have done in the past, and because there is that notion that cross-dressing is different to being trans, but it's really part of the same system in a sense.
Yeah, it's certainly a spectrum, as we've now come to describe it. I suppose in the 1980s or so, there was a clear delineation between the two. I think maybe trans wasn't necessarily out in the open, and it was something that was very hidden away, or it was very public, like showgirls or something along those lines. But yeah, the cross-dressers and transvestites, as the term was then, which has become very out of favour.
Sort of a negative connotation.
It certainly is
even though it's just Latin for cross-dressing.
Exactly.
Were you able to talk to anyone about it within family
Certainly
or friends
not.
group?
There was no discussions at all with any of my family members, but not certainly my parents. It was something that I definitely kept to myself as much as I possibly could. There was certainly no outward presentation. I'm sure that, as every person who tries to hide these things, there are giveaways. There's lots of ways that you slip up, that would give the game away if anyone is observant. But even if that was seen, I don't think the conversation would have been had. The topic wouldn't have come up in those days.
So you've gone through school and end up out in the big wide world and a job and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
So when you met Lyndall, did you sort of say something about this side of your life straight away?
No, certainly not. Once again, it was still very private at that stage, and early on in the relationship, I was trying to do as much normal things and present as any normal male would. You brought it up. There's, once again, trying to hide things. You're always going to fail, and I think it was a pair of heels that
No, it was stockings.
So Lyndall, bringing you into the conversation, so that was your first inkling of something different with Rob.
Yes.
What was your reaction?
Well, I was shocked, of course, finding stockings, but I was aware of cross-dressing, so it wasn't. My first thought is Rob a cross-dresser? So I did go to Rob and said, "Are these yours?" And he said yes. And so we sort of evolved from that. It was just okay. So once in a while, Rob likes to wear stockings. That was what I thought.
One of the big challenges, I suppose, of the question that was always asked of me was, how far will this go? Was that sort of on your radar, as it were?
Not at the very start, no. No, that did progress to that later on, because I thought maybe Rob just liked wearing stockings. So it wasn't until that progression when next it was buying high heels and the step-by-step that went on. That's when I started to get worried about where does this end.
So had you children at that stage, or?
They came after, but Rob still was maybe wearing stockings and high heels on the occasion when we had kids. It's always been a progression.
One of the challenges, I suppose, too, in a relationship is that who did you confide in? Did you have somebody to confide in?
No, I kept it to myself for a very long time. So,
and how did that sort of make you feel?
not great. I'm a very open person, so keeping something hidden was a struggle for me, but I didn't know how it was going to be perceived by other people. It was, trying to, in my own mind, is trying to work it out before I started telling other people about it.
Were you sort of encouraging Rob to sort of seek help?
Not to seek help so much, but to encourage Rob to, to do what he wanted to do and to go with that. But I had this internal conflict. Part of me was being very supportive of Rob to, discover their true self, but also the other conflict was within myself is I didn't sign up for this. So, it was this big internal struggle that was happening.
Rob, were you aware of that sort of conflict?
No. So I'm not necessarily a great observant person in reading other people's body language and internal struggles. Lyndall is very good at keeping things to herself when she wants to keep things to herself. And also I'm a very private person in terms of showing my feelings and describing my feelings. I've learnt to change that behaviour, certainly with the help of counsellors, which has been a relatively recent endeavour for me, and it has let me work out that holding certain conversations in my head needs to be discussed, especially with Lyndall. So that's a relatively recent thing, but certainly throughout the main probably 10 to 15 years that we were going out, I was really holding a lot of things to myself, and Lyndall would only see it as the little goalposts that keep moving, as we've subsequently determined it. And I like to push the boundaries every now and then. Lyndall would get comfortable with something, and then I'd push the boundary a little bit further. It might start with manicures and pedicures, and then they became a little bit more overt, as opposed to clear nail polish. Then it became a bit more overt. Then it was on special occasions, and it sort of evolved from there.
So the pushing of those boundaries and those little goalposts, what was your progression of apprehension or?
Yes, it was very unsettling for me because I would finally get to a point where I'm comfortable where we're at, and then again, like we've mentioned before, the goalpost would be changed. So it was forever sort of like a roller coaster ride for me. Of just I'd get I'm comfortable, we're straight, and then suddenly bang down again. So for me, it was scary readjusting each time when where I got to the point I didn't know where this was going to end, and that was when it was getting very obvious that I started to have that fear. Where does this end?
Yeah, so because conversations I've had with people over the years in my role with Seahorse is that quite often at the stage that both you are at that, as we're just discussing, the partner would say, go, leave, get out. Were you ever tempted to do that?
Well, yes, definitely. Not in the early stages. That was my point of ending a relationship was probably about a year and a half ago now, where Robert decided to have breast enhancements, and that was an area that he assured me that he was never going to go to that, to have that his end was maybe wearing female clothes all the time, but not any surgery was ever on the table. So that really tipped me over the edge, and where we did have a temporary breakup.
I know just from personal experience, it's a real emotional roller coaster at that point. Before I sort of follow on from that a little bit, were you aware of that?
By that stage, we'd started to have those conversations. I was still not as forthcoming in my personal views and my thoughts at the time. So it would have been difficult for Lyndall to interact in some of those conversations because I was still keeping a lot of things private to myself.
Yeah. So I might just step back a bit in time to when you finally decided that you're going to sort of do something outside of the close relationship to deal with this side of your life. What did you do?
Yeah, so that, I think it was around about the COVID era. I think that was a big change for a lot of people. Being in isolation, you've got a lot of time to think to yourself. There's not a lot of interaction with other people and your peers. So at that stage, it would have been around about 2 years ago, I made the decision to seek counselling for the first time, just to talk through with an independent person to try and understand what the thoughts in my head were and how that does actually relate to my outward presentation, all that sort of stuff. I sat on that thought for probably about 5 to 6 months before I finally, I didn't even say to Lyndall that I'm looking at getting counselling. I was still in that very private mode. And it took me about 5 months or so to actually make the first booking. And then I sent you a message to say, I'm going to see a counsellor. And that's when a lot of the conversations then really started happening.
At that point, or even prior to that, were you sort of considering your own sort of going to sort out with somebody, some sort of external help to work out where you were at and how you were thinking?
Not prior to the Rob having the surgery, but afterwards it sort of became apparent that I would need some extra supports because I wasn't coping well. I was, very emotional.
Yeah, I can see that in your face and voice. Now, I don't wish to sort of impose too much, but you did approach me some months ago to sort of talk about relationships with a partner who is dressing and maybe transitioning, and that would indicate to me that you'd like to give some sort of sense of what it's like to be a partner in that circumstance. So in making that conversation with me, very briefly in a sense, what is it that you really wanted to sort of convey?
There's not many supports for women like me who are in this position, and so it was very isolating in that sense to find a community of other cis females to talk about, which I did find in a Facebook group. But what I found that was a bit common is when people are transitioning with how they treat their partners, they really don't have an understanding that they've known about this all their life, so they've had time to think about that on their own. But for a partner, it comes out of nowhere. Often the person transitioning will have an expectation of their partner to be at a certain level, and they're just not, because this is quite traumatic, and we have a time that we need to process all of this information and work out how we want to proceed in the relationship. For some people, they do need to separate. It's something that they can't continue with. Other people like us that are, remain together. So but it's in how people handle it together and to be kind to each other.
I know over the years, groups such as Seahorse have every so often had partner efforts to have partners together, or just the partners by themselves. And we've found, even in the time that I've been involved, that it might last for 3 or 4 meetings, and then they say, well, that's it, we go off on our own direction to solve the relationship. How have you actually found that interaction with other partners?
Their experience have probably been a lot more negative than what mine has been, and that can be to do with their partner who's not understanding that their partner's not where they're at, like I was mentioning before, that they've had time, they haven't had the time to think about all of this. So the partners can be quite mean, shall we say, and just go, well, you should accept me for whatever I am, and don't give them a chance to sort of catch up. So my experience has been quite different. Rob has been quite understanding with me and is aware that it's been a struggle for me. So, you know, there's been a couple of times where I call it the pink fog, where Rob's mindset's been that and going, you're really hurting me, so we need to backtrack. So, yeah, so in sometimes those supports are really good. Other times it's really sad what other people's experience have been with their partners transitioning. And
so you were saying there that you had thoughts about leaving the relationship. What was the thing that sort of, at the moment, put that aside and to be where you are now?
Well, we got counselling. We wanted the counselling, regardless if we were going to stay together or if we split up. If we were to split up, we've always wanted to do that in a good way and to not be angry with each other, to do that most positive way as you can get in that situation. But during that counselling, it sort of became really apparent that we didn't want to split up, and it was more of a chance for me to learn to accept and to get through this stage. So it was during the counselling that really helped to cement what I want. And I think deep down I didn't want to leave.
And Rob, what about you? How are you sort of handling that?
Certainly with the processes that we went through together and what I went through well in advance of where Lyndall was progressing and processing all this. When I initially got the counselling, that would have been last from maybe about 6 months over maybe half a dozen sessions or so. Those conversations were important and paramount to getting everything right in my own head. And that allowed me to get myself into a position. But unfortunately, and that's where all the conversation started about us separating, because I was right in my own head, but Lyndall needed to catch up. And those counselling sessions, and particularly when we started the couples counselling, gave me the lessons and the skills to appreciate and where Lyndall was going through and her progression, and to try and support her journey. Admittedly, it was from my own selfish perspective, because I would prefer the relationship to continue. So I wanted the outcome of us staying together, but I needed to have Lyndall work through all the challenges that we had.
The point you make there about there's a certain degree of selfishness about it because, well, one, it is about the rest of your life anyway. Because it's secretive, you sort of tend to sort of bottle everything up.
Yes.
And so your focus is totally on yourself in a sense, and you took away from my partner. And it was after only very many teary conversations many years ago that we were able to sort of start, I took my focus away from my wife. You know, the outcomes aren't always exactly as you would like them, but what sort of compromises have you made?
Well, if to be honest, if you ask Lyndall, there's none. And I would almost tend to agree with that. I pretty much have not pulled back on any of what I now see as my internal presentation, my internal identity. So yeah, I actually think there's, to my detriment, I don't think that I have compromised in terms of my desired outcome. I've tried to be as supportive in helping Lyndall meet, once again, that's selfish, or from my perspective, definitely, to get through to where we are now. Has been a great outcome for me. It's still a struggle for both of us. That's certainly apparent, and we still have a lot of more work to do, making sure our relationship does actually continue and stand the test of time.
So, Lyndall, with this sort of emotional struggle really between the two of you, when did you finally go and tell family and others about it so that they understood what was happening?
My parents have known for years that Rob's a crossdresser. So it wasn't just suddenly told them. They knew that was the case. But but then I did tell them when Rob told me that he wanted to have the surgery for the breast enhancement. So it was at that stage that I told them that, and that Rob was dressing full time in feminine clothes.
So how has the family support overall been for you as one for you and in the relationship of the family?
Really good. Really good. My parents have always been really supportive, and they've always been kind to Rob too. That was important for me. I understand that, families are going to side with you, but I never wanted them to treat Rob any differently, and they've always done that, which, they haven't always been happy with what's happening, but they've always treated you. They've accepted. And then when Rob's family found out, they've always been supportive for me too.
Obviously with kids involved.
That's the easiest side of it all. Our boys have friends from the whole rainbow community. So for them, I say to them, how do you feel going out to shops with Dad? Before we go any further, that mentioned that Rob's okay with any pronoun, and uses his birth name of Rob's. So I'm not misgendering him. When they go to ask them how they went with their going down the shops, how they feel with their dad, I'm like, I don't care. Are you embarrassed? No. So that's just for them. It's quite normal. They've got transgendered friends. They, from the whole rainbow. So for them, it's just another day.
So that obviously makes it easier for both of you to become more comfortable with the relationship as opposed to, being at loggerheads.
Yes, because I think it'd be a different experience if the boys reacted differently to it. If it was a really big struggle for them, then that would have been a lot harder. That would have added a whole new element. And
that's your experience?
Yeah, certainly. Back in the early days when I was also a member of Seahorse, the boys were a lot younger then, and I was sneaking out of the house to try and avoid any sort of confrontation and the conversations that would ensue from that. But over the years, as I've become a little bit more lax in hiding stuff. It certainly wasn't a shock when we sat them down and discussed with what was going to happen. Their biggest concern was making sure that there was some level of stability or that we were okay. And as Linda was saying, is when we asked them, "Has he got any problems?" It was just the typical teenage nut. Right? So that certainly took one big pressure off, and we could focus on our relationship without having to worry about the fallout in our immediate family.
We did tell the boys when they were both 10 years of age, and we just said, Daddy sometimes likes to wear women's clothes. So though they didn't see Rob dressed in female clothes around that time, they were aware of it, and Rob was doing the nail polish and had both his ears pierced, and at that stage anyway, so it wasn't a fuss. So it was always, from a certain age, they're always aware of it, so it wasn't just suddenly, here you go.
One of my grandsons has sort of known about me all his life, sort of thing, and doesn't care which way he sees me. In many ways, it's sort of, and it's nice to sort of feel that you sort of have, as you pointed out, a stable sort of relationship, even if there's difficulties in it. That the family sort of feels as though it's still functioning the way it should function, and that the kids are growing up with a sense of healthy awareness of themselves and how to treat others. With your experience, what do you see in sort of, one, having this conversation publicly, a way to help others.
The process of starting up a support group for women that are in the same position as me, to have those supports there. And always really happy to speak to anyone in the transgender community who is thinking about telling their partner, and to help anyone with some pointers on
What not to do.
what not to do, and
not to do.
a better way to do things.
Yeah, because that's one of the conversations I have with individuals over the years, is that probably the worst thing you can do is jump out from behind the tree and go, ta-da.
Yes.
Because the shock and awe, while at that very instant, there's no immediate reaction, but it's what happens in the days and weeks and months and years beyond that is the issue. Because, well, it doesn't matter. It's a bit like a hypochondriac in a sense. The more you talk about from the selfish point of view, it just drives everyone else nuts. But if it's discussed relatively healthily and openly, and you take cognizance of each other's point of view, then you can sort of work through most things. You say you're sort of looking at starting up a group, but how well progressed are you towards that?
I think I've still a little bit of healing to do before I'm going to fully start it, but I am currently sourcing a place to hold the groups at. So I'd like it sort of to be local, but it might be that it needs to be Australia-wide as opposed to local, depending on, I just don't know the numbers out there of who want these kind of supports and this support group.
Clinics such as Monash Gender Clinic have run support groups over the years. They tend not to last overly long with every particular group, but it's a bit like the need for seahorses. That the ideal is it shouldn't exist in the near future, but we know that there's always going to be somebody.
Yeah. But it's interesting, I've found in the Facebook group that I'm in that for these cis women, it's not a short term, everything's good. There's women on there that have been on there for years, and they are still traumatised by the experience, and some of them are on there that still talk on it. They separated from their partner, 5 years ago, but they are still active on this group. So I don't think it'd be a short-term need. I think it's a long-term need to keep having those supports and talking to people in the same position.
I wish you really good luck with that, because it is a big challenge to take on something like that, because I know just from the social support group like Seahorse, that and we've all been on committees, and you sort of think there's a never-ending process to it, and I wish somebody'd come along and take the burden off my hands type thing. So I wish you really enormous success with that. So just to sort of round out the conversation today, so Rob, what sort of support are you giving towards this, or are you more focused still on yourself?
No, certainly. I say I hate the word journey, but my journey is essentially where I want it to be in my own head. So I'm trying to give as much support to Lyndall as I possibly can. We keep having, and I make sure we have the conversations. Are there any problems that are festering or can be seen on the horizon that we need to discuss? Because this is an ongoing thing that we will need to make sure we have good, strong conversations and agree on our outcomes.
And Lyndall, where do you see yourself at in the near future with this?
I'm still with Rob, and just working through it and taking each new challenge as it comes along. I'm hopeful there's no more surgeries in the pipeline, but who knows? But yeah.
So the important thing is to still have the relationship and provide that with you. I think on that encouraging note, I'd like to thank you for joining us in the conversation tonight, and look forward to seeing how your project goes in the near future and the long-term future.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you for watching Ben TV. I'm Greer McGeary. My guests have been Lyndall and Rob Slaney.